Hi, I'm Tori Koontz.
And I'm Mrs. Wheaton, and we're from the Fairfield Middle School, and we are at Cemetery Day today. Today the students will be touring Evergreen Cemetery, and there are 4 stops there. They will be working on epitaphs. They will be doing a rubbing. They will be participating in a cemetery walk where local participants are putting on a show for them. And then they will end with, I need some help, the last one. Oh, no, they will end out the cemetery, with Ralph Hickenbottom giving them some information on the cemetery. We have been to Whitney Monument. We are at Raymond Funeral Home right now, and then at the library they will be learning about burial customs down through all of the centuries. So here we are at Raymond Funeral Home, and we're about to begin.
Hi, I'm Jack Raymond, Raymond Funeral Home. Welcome you all to your day out today, and like to show you a little bit about the funeral home. Funeral customs, are traditionally brought down by each ethnic group, and each locale or area has some variation in their funeral customs. Things have changed. We used to have kind of a traditional funeral, and everybody's funeral was very similar. Today, funerals are pretty much whatever the families want to do. We see more and more individualized funerals. We have family bringing photographs and putting bulletin boards and some personal items for display to help people remember that individual and some of their hobbies and activities when they were alive. Recently we had a funeral service. The gentleman was very interested in Harley-Davidson motorcycles. We had his casket in our funeral home at Birmingham and his Harley-Davidson dresser bike sitting right next to the casket. When we left the cemetery, the casket was placed on the back of the semi he drove for 30 years, or similar to this one company he drove for. On the back of his semi. We had another one about a month before in Birmingham that we used the semi for the casket to go to the cemetery instead of the hearse. So this is changes that are coming about in different funeral traditions, and I think it's very good because people can do what they want, get an idea of things that are meaningful to them and to the person that has died. If we may, we'll go through and look at the funeral home. The room to your left is the front office. It's where we meet with family and to make arrangements and find out what their wishes are for the funeral services, the times, who will participate, the minister, musicians, and pallbearers, and any family or friends that might want to give a little eulogy or talk a little bit about the individual. The room we're in right now, I call either the music room or pallbearer room. Of course, the organ here for whomever provides music, both instrumental and or vocal music. The minister and the pallbearers are seated in this room too when they're not participating. Again, whatever is right for the individual or their families as far as the type of music. We had Billy Ray Cyrus's Achy Breaky Heart as on a CD played, and I think that after we had that song, anything goes for what people want for their own music. During the visitation, friends visit in there and in this room. During the funeral service, we set rows of chairs up and the family is seated in that room. The casket's placed here with the flowers and any photographs that the family chooses, and then the minister stands here and he can speak to the family and the friends that are seated back here in our chapel. We'll come on through. Have additional caskets if we have more than one service arranged at the same time or same time period. We can have a viewing here, or if we have a large crowd expected for a funeral, We can set other chairs up here, and we can accommodate about 300 people seated in the whole funeral home. A little change in our tradition through the years. When I started working for the funeral home when I was in 7th grade. Of course, my dad owned it, so it was either a plus or minus or no decision. I was just told to come to work after school. And I helped with the ambulance in those days. The funeral home ran the ambulance service for Fairfield and Jefferson County. It was very unusual to have a cremation. As I was getting into helping with funerals, we probably had the last 2 funerals that were held in a home. I did about 5 years ago, had one visitation in a home with the casket taken to the family's home at their choice. But many years ago, a lot of funerals were held in the home. There were no funeral homes, or the funerals, of course, were held quite often in the churches. Cremation is something that's becoming a little more popular. In our area, between 10 to 15% of deaths have cremation instead of burial at the cemetery. After the cremation is completed, the ashes, cremains, there's several different names for the remains after cremation, are usually placed in an urn. And we have several here. There are many others available. If somebody chooses a full-size urn and the ashes for an individual fit in any of these, and if they choose to bury this or keep it on their mantle at home, if they choose, then they can buy miniatures and keep a few, so each of the children can each have some of the ashes, if that's the family's choices. They also have jewelry now, pendants, little necklaces with hearts or crosses that just a few grains of the ashes can be placed in that if somebody chooses to have that to wear, as their keepsake. Urns can be placed in a urn vault. That's an option, family's choice. Usually ashes are buried at the cemetery. They can be scattered over their own private grounds or supposedly not on public grounds or somebody else's without their permission. Some people scatter ashes. We had some that were taken to the north woods of Canada and scattered where the campground where the man used to hunt. We've had them scattered from the back of a horse as they rode along the trail where the family rode their horses, and of course scattered in their rose garden at home, and whatever the family's wishes are. You can hire a space or rent a space on a spaceship and have them shot into the atmosphere. Or we had one lady whose ashes were shot from fireworks locally here. They found a company with fireworks, and or they made the fireworks and had them for a fireworks display at Waterworks. They do have companies, or people can load their own ashes, or not their own, but ashes of someone into shotguns and shoot them, out of the shotgun if they were sportsmen. We'll go in where the caskets are now. As to the type of material they're made with, there's a wide variety of price ranges. The least expensive that we have is $550. The most expensive we have right now is this solid copper casket. It's almost $4,000. We have stainless steel caskets. We have regular steel caskets of different thickness of metal. We have the solid wood caskets. Behind us here is the solid cherry, solid maple right next to it. We have 2 solid oak caskets here. Sometimes I will have a pecan a walnut, hickory, trying to think, or mahogany, depending on the type of material a person's family wants. They can personalize caskets. The one on the north wall there has what they call the farm scene, picked out quite often for people that have a farming background and or love of the farm. We can get them with airplanes, golf clubs, gardens, quilts. There's one that has a whole interior made of a quilt. And they've got all kinds of decorations. I've had one family that has asked to have their personal farm scene put inside the casket. I'm waiting for that salesman to come by to tell me how to get that scene stitched into the top of the casket, but it can be done. As I mentioned, the caskets range from about $4,000. If somebody wants to, we can get one for about $25,000. I've only seen one of those in my life. And there's a range any place from $550 to the $4,000 usually. At the cemetery, most cemeteries have a regulation that a casket will go inside of a vault, or by state law, no state law, I'm sorry, by cemetery regulations, that it will be at least a concrete container. Concrete container is just a cement box with no sealing. It just keeps the weight of the dirt off of the casket and keeps the grave from caving in. The vault does the same thing, only it's made of heavier concrete and it's lined with a moisture-proof barrier lining inside. And it does seal, and it keeps air and dirt and moisture, everything away from the casket. Anybody have any questions till now? Okay. The next part we're going to is what is the preparation room or embalming room. Some people may choose to wait and not go in there. You're welcome to. If you choose not, you're welcome just wait for us, and we'll be right back in about 10 minutes.
Hi, I'm Heather Wiggis, and we're here at Evergreen Cemetery today for our 7th grade Cemetery Day. A group that we just had here is now on the cemetery walk, talking about the different people of the community and where they are buried and what they did while they were here. The station that I'm running is the Epitaph station, where they learn about the inscriptions on different tombstones and what they mean and all those sorts of things. And what we do is we go around and look at the different examples here in Evergreen Cemetery. There's some really neat ones with songs and poems on them. And then they come back here and they are able to write their own.
This is your car, isn't it?
Nope.
It is too.
This is it. It is. I like
It is too.
Thanks. Don't lean on it. Off. Okay, did you guys just come from the cemetery walk?
Yeah.
Was that pretty cool?
Yeah.
Yeah? Not too bad?
I got a brush. We got
You got brushes. Oh, from
That was my
Harper
favorite.
Brush? Cool. Nice. Well, in your case. All right. Here is the epitaph station. You guys are going to be writing epitaphs. Does anybody know what an epitaph is? Can you explain it to me,
The
Mark?
thing that goes on the saying that goes on the grave. Blah.
The headstone.
Yeah.
The headstone. The thing that goes on the headstone. Paul, can you add to that?
The like phrases that go on the head.
Okay, maybe phrases. Anything else you want to add?
The name.
The names, okay. Yes, the phrases. It's an inscription. Lots of times that they put on the memorial, the headstone. It can be in a lot of different types. It could be a poem, it could be a song, it could be scripture from the Bible, anything that might reflect the life of that person that has passed on. So what we're going to do, we're going to kind of take some time and I'm going to show you some examples of some different epitaphs that are on these stones, and then we're going to come back here and you guys are going to write your own epitaph. Okay, so be thinking maybe of what you would want to have on there as we go through these. Okay, so follow me. This is the first one. If you guys want to come around and look at the picture first. This, you probably know this one. This is Ms. Chapman's son's. This is Bryce's. This is his memorial. This is a picture of them. It's an actual picture. And on the back here, you might want to turn around like as we go on. You don't have to do it right now. There's, it's a poem. It's actually a song that they had put on here that says, "He ain't heavy, he's my brother." It says, "The road is long with many a winding turn that leads us to who knows where, But I'm strong enough to carry him. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. His welfare is my concern, no burden is he to bear. We'll get there, for I know he would not encumber me. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. It's a long, long road from which there is no return. While we're on our way there, why not share? And the load doesn't weigh me down at all. He ain't heavy, he's my brother." So it's in commemoration of Bryce, right? This is Mrs. Chapman's son. Yep.
This is one that Kim had in the slides.
Yeah, this is one. Yeah, they did show this one in his slides, so it's kind of neat. Accident. Motorcycle accident. All right.
This is an actual picture.
Yeah, it's an actual. Mrs. Chapman actually has this in her living room. That picture, the real picture. Okay. Let's go look at another one. It's over here. Here's one. These are from. This is from a couple. They actually have not died yet. This is just their stone that they have. It's all ready to go. But like I said before, some of these have are very faith-based, are part of their religious beliefs and things. And so this one says, "Our lives have not been easy. We are hurt and tired through and through. Open your pearly gates, dear Jesus. We are coming home to be with you. Praise God." And so this is another one that is a good example of an epitaph.
Sure.
Yes.
Some people used to prefer to be buried above ground, and there was one right here, a granite building called the Mausoleum.
The mausoleum, yeah.
And it got so that nobody knew who was in there, and it was
Really?
crumbling down. And that custom's kind of gone out. Now everybody's buried below ground.
Yeah, yep, that was out here. Okay, we're gonna go look at one more, but it's kind of down there a ways in the corner.
Oh, I don't know.
One of a young man. He wasn't very old either. This is also one that Kent Whitney showed in one of his slides last week of this kid. And on the back again is another poem, but this one has a little different tone than the other ones. This one is geared more toward those people that he left behind as sort of a comfort that he's gone. And it says, "Don't grieve for me, for now I'm free. I'm following the path God laid for me. I took his hand when I heard him call. I turned my back and left it all. I could not stay another day to laugh, to love, to work or play. Tasks left undone must stay that way. I found that place at the close of the day. If my parting has left a void, then fill it with remembered joy. A friendship shared, a laugh, a kiss, and yes, these things I too will miss. Be not burdened with times of sorrow. I wish you the sunshine of tomorrow. My life's been full, I've savored much. Good friends, good times, a loved one's touch. Perhaps my time seemed all too brief. Don't lengthen it now with undue grief. Lift up your heart and share with me. God wanted me now, he set me free." And as you guys maybe want to come around, there's another picture on this side too that goes along with the poem that just kind of shows him on his bike. We're not real sure. I don't think he was married. That might be him and his sister when they were younger. He was in an accident. I think it was a motorcycle too. I think. Wasn't it a motorcycle? Mm-hmm. All right. So this kind of gives you an idea of some of those things that people want to be remembered by, or the comfort that they want to give to other people. So why don't we go back up to where we started and maybe think about what you might want on your epitaph. So we've gone around and we looked at some different examples. You guys are going to have the chance now to write your own. And you can do this in a couple different ways. You can be serious. You can kind of think of it as, well, what do I want to be remembered for? Or what kind of person do I want people to remember me of being? Things like that. Or you can make it funny. Something that reflects your personality, Benny. I'm just kidding. Something like that. All right, so kind of take a little bit of time. I'm going to hand out some clipboards for you guys to write on, and I'll give you some paper. Yes. You do not have to read them if you don't want to. You don't have to. I would like you to, just because I like to hear what you guys have to say, because I think it'd be neat. Oh, thank you. Whoops. Thanks. Oh, yes.
It's around the chair.
Teacher,
I got it. Yes,
I
sir.
had some quick things.
You betcha.
Around the chair.
Oh, whoops.
I
Yes,
like
Mr.
the
Gobble.
improvements that's being made in tombstones, because it's hard to keep track of generations as you get older. And you walk up to a tombstone now, and it tells the parents, and then tells their children's names, and it's a neat thing. There's one over here that may be carried a little far. He was killed on a motorcycle, and they've got a motorcycle on the tombstone. I don't know whether I go for that too much.
Yeah, I think we did see that one. Yeah. Yep.
I was so funny, but now I'm not. I'm dead, I'm gone. Forevermore, I will not be here. I miss the people who loved me, so I hope they miss me too.
All right. Now. All right. My name is Andrew George, but I changed my name to Fred before I died. So, here lies beloved Fred. Please don't stand on my head. I lived to be 50, and I looked very nifty. I choked and croaked. My life was a joke.
My turn. Paul Allen Milhouse, please do not forget me. I have left my love. I've seen the Lord, for he has let me in. Please do not forget me, my love.
There. Go.
My name is Kristen Grillman. I am an individual. People always said I couldn't do it. I wouldn't amount to anything. Jesus thought I could. Or why would he put me here? But now he wants me with him forever, and he will never say anything to me except I love you.
Are you all getting tired of all this walking? You'll sleep good tonight. Okay, today I'm going to tell you about Lorenzo Russell Heston, better known as Lon Heston, and he was born in 1893. He was very active in community as well as Fairfield, you know, in his business. Lon Heston was my father, and this is him at the far right, and his partner was Abner Anderson. And as young men, they started working at Louden Machinery. My father was a draftsman, and his partner was a pattern maker. So they combined their skills and decided they wanted to do some projects other than their jobs that they were doing there at Loudon's. So they started in the basement of our home on West Washington Street. And the project was a iron scraper of some sort, and they needed a bandsaw in order to cut it out to make the thing start. They didn't have such a thing, so with what was gas pipes and washing machine parts, they made a bandsaw. And it worked so well that a local contractor bought it as soon as they had made it. So they thought, well, they'd improve on it, make it a little nicer. And so they soon had so many people wanting them that they started hiring employees, and they got 3 more employees, and they all worked in our basement. And it was getting a little crowded. So the next step for them, they built a building at the end of 6th Street there in Depot, which is now Whitney Monument Works. And that's where their second shop was. And there they hired quite a few more employees and really got into different woodworking machinery more. Different kinds, lathes and all kinds of different styles. So there, that began to get crowded. And what's interesting on this is that our son Kent, I married a Whitney, and where the Whitney Monument Works is today, both of his grandfathers were workers there. First his grandpa Heston, and then his grandpa Whitney. History is fascinating if you think about it a little bit, all the things that happened during the ages. It's interesting. Anyway, they soon became too crowded there, so they moved over on Kirkwood and built a regular manufacturing plant. and hired a lot more men. At the same time as that he was enjoying working in the business, he started branching out in the community more. And he was the president of several organizations, Chamber of Commerce, Rotary, Fairfield Country Club, as well as being active in the Methodist Church and the Fairfield School Board. He enjoyed his family. I can remember he would bring sawhorses. I mean, we'd have 3 of them and a board spread out for family dinners, and we'd all get together at our house, and he loved doing things like that. As a boy, he had an inventive mind back when he was young. He rigged up a gadget. He was supposed to pick the beans in the garden, the green beans. So he came up with an automatic picker of some sort and made it do it faster and quicker. But this was the way his mind worked. So I tell all of you, hold fast on good ideas and come up with different things. That with the internet you have even more ways to branch out. So he was here local, but I think my word, if he was here today, it would be all over the country because their machines spread out very fast for a few years. But then he died at the age of 51. He had minor surgery, but now they give people stuff for blood clots, and a blood clot took him, and that happened to be on D-Day. So it was kind of an interesting life that he had. Now, are you familiar with woodworking machinery? Do any of your fathers have them in their... Okay, I figured they would. And you'll still see a Heston and Anderson bandsaw and different lathes and things around at sales here, but they're getting scarcer and scarcer. Any other questions?
Thank you very, very much.
Well, you're welcome.
Really appreciate that.
You're welcome. Enjoyed it.
Can you hear me? By way of introduction, I'm Lee Gobble, and I've lived here in Fairfield all my life. I went to Washington grade school, and I went to an older FHS that burned. Can you imagine what happens to a guy with a name like Gobble? Ever since I'm little, hi turkey, gobble, gobble, gobble. And I tell everybody I'm not George Gobble or Clark Gable, I'm Lee Gobble. So I used to, instead of fighting them and telling them why now, I join them and I go in on that turkey stuff too. We're at the grave of my parents, but I've chosen to be my great-grandfather back in 1844. The stories back then will amaze you more than this generation. He settled 12 miles northwest of here that became Abington. It's near Packwood and Pekin School. Grandpappy, as his family called him, was born in 1818 and came here 191 years ago. That's 20 years before Lincoln was our president. As we relive these stories, I want you to keep in mind there were no TVs, no radio, no cars, no telephones, no computers, no air conditioning, no indoor toilets. There was running water out in the creek, not in the house. But just think, what's not yet invented or we've never heard of, we can't miss. So I'm glad to join in on this project, but none of the teachers told me there'd be homework. And you know what I've been doing the last 2 nights? No TV, I've been doing family homework. All right, here we go. I'm Thomas Wilson Gobble, age 26, married with 1 child. I live in Abington, Virginia. It's 1843 and the United States government is opening up the Middle West and urging people to move to west and to settle this new territory. As an incentive to move on this unsettled land, mostly timber, they're offering it for $1.25 an acre. That'd be like about $1,000 today. You could buy up to 180 acres. I'd planned on moving to Missouri, but my father-in-law was just back from Iowa telling what a promising land it was. I learned Missouri was a slave state, but Iowa wasn't, so I headed for Iowa. I have been a blacksmith and a carpenter, so I made a wagon mostly by myself for the trip. We left Virginia in August of 1844, and after a 34-day trip crossing mountains, ferrying across several rivers in 6 or 7 states, we arrived in October 1844 to start a new life on new land in a new environment. We traveled only once on Sunday. I was a very religious man. Looking over the surrounding countryside, I chose the 180 acres that suited me best. I cleared the land, built our log cabin, a dirt floor at first, and soon we had a well. The deed for the farm was signed by the 11th President Polk, not on paper but on parchment. Often there were large prairie fires that had been set by lightning. We had wooden fences, and later on wire. Soon we had neighbors, a school, and church was held in homes. Along with farming, I became skilled making furniture and coffins, opened a shop, and later added groceries and farm tools. Our first clothing was all homespun. Matches weren't yet known, and fires were started by a piece of flint. We raised all kinds of animals, of course, and there were wild animals of wolves, wildcats, prairie chickens, snakes, and wild pigeons. Most of the roads were old Indian trails. Very few Indians were seen now because most have left for Nebraska. Our township of Locust Grove has grown as the garden spot in Iowa, and I'll always be glad to live here. Social gatherings were house raisings and spelling bees. We visited neighbors more then. Communication was either on horseback or wagon or ox team. By 1855, we had 250 people, 6 stores, a post office, a saloon, shoemaker, doctor, schoolhouse, and 3 churches. Abington never got a railroad, and that a railroad either made or broke a town. So this budding town has started to dwindle. I had 2 wives. The first one died and had 12 children. 6 sons are being raised on the farm. I've trained all to be merchants and have been successful in business. One of the wives, Mary Margaret Flint Gobble, advised her family in 1895 that next year we're moving to town, Fairfield. She wanted her sons to get a better education. I thought this was a lot of vision for a woman back then. Son Bruce was to graduate from the 8th grade, and Fairfield had a high school, a college, and a Carnegie library, so she wanted her family to be able to attend church and Sunday school every Sunday and wanted to be able to take an active part in church activities. My families are now spread all over eastern Iowa. One son owns a clothing store in Fairfield and is a vice president in the bank. My families are duty-bound to come back to the farm for a family reunion every October 9th, the day I arrived in Abington, Iowa from Abington, Virginia. I lived to be 95, and I'm proud and prospered, and I'm content. The farm was purchased from my estate by a son, Thomas Gobble, in Clinton, Iowa, and remained in the family for over 100 years. So there's the result of my homework for 2 nights. What did I forget, or what didn't I explain clearly? I want to compliment you on your behavior and all. No brats here at all. I'm running short on treats. So well, this will have to be girls only.
All right.
I don't give kisses to boys. Would you pass these? There's a few more in here. Thanks.
Yeah, you can sit down if you like. Hey, Hi, my name is Alfonso King Harper. My friends called me AK. I was born on May 4th in 1878 in Ohio. I'm buried here along with my father John, who was also born on May 4th. One of the things we did as a family when I was growing up is to celebrate birthdays. He would give me 50 cents in the morning, and in the afternoon I'd turn around and give him 50 cents back. So that's the way we exchanged our gifts. When I was about 10 years old, I wanted to earn some money to spend, and so I saw some sewing needles in a mail order catalog out of Chicago, and I bought a bunch of sewing needles, and I went around and sold them door to door to make money. Back in the 1800s, most people made their own clothes. They didn't buy them at a clothing store. So that was my first experience as a businessman. And I moved to Fairfield when I was about 10 years old, and did some things like ride horseback, and there weren't organized sports, but I did do boxing. When I got into high school, I graduated from Fairfield High in 1896, about 106 years ago. But when I was in high school, I developed a product that I thought would make my mom's job easier cleaning her house. And this was an item that washed the windows and scrubbed the floors and stretched carpet and got cobwebs out of the corners of the ceiling. So I then went on to college at Parsons College, which was located here in Fairfield, and I went there for 4 years. And while I was in school, I started designing and making brushes, and this is the way we made them back in the 1900s and the 1800s. So we took a block of wood and we cut it in half, and we took a little like a needle, and we would pull wire through the drilled holes that we drilled by hand and put a tuft of fiber in the brush. It was very time consuming, and you couldn't make very many. So during the school year, that's what I would do along with my friends, and then I would go out in the summertime and hire other college students to sell our product. And we would visit states like Illinois and Missouri and Minnesota. And some of these college students could make as much as $500, and this would be back around 1899, 1900, which was quite a bit of money. When I graduated from college, I started my own business, and it's called Harper Brush. So the business was started in 1900. In 1901, I married my college sweetheart. Her name was Beatrice Brown, and she was a music teacher at Parsons College. Shortly thereafter, we started our family, and I had 3 children. Portia, who is our only daughter, and then 2 sons, Paul and Dale. I currently have 13 grandchildren, and one of the things that I was known for in the community was I really enjoyed children, and I always carried candy with me. And so I would pass candy out to people, just pass it around if you'd like, go to church and Sunday school, and I was always giving candy out to all these children, and of course the parents didn't like it because they would make noise in church and do everything, but all my grandchildren knew where the candy jar was whenever they came to visit me. In the 1920s, after I got my business started, we set up various salesmen around the country, and they sold the product in different ways. Here you can see a gentleman on a motorcycle with his broom strapped to the side, and he would go out in the countryside and sell to farmers. Over on this side, this is in the 1920s, one of the things that they had to do was, because not everybody had cash that they could pay for the product, so they would give them a couple chickens in exchange for a brush. And you can see the cage here that the chickens would be collected, and then the salesman would come back to town and sell them to the poultry processor in exchange for the cash. During the Depression, back in the 1930s, business was very tough, and a lot of banks closed and other businesses, but we were able to keep our business going. Our employees only worked half a day, and we used some of the space in our warehouse to store corn and wheat, and the government paid us for doing that, so we were able to keep our business going. About the middle of the 1930s, my oldest son, Paul, graduated from college, Harvard University. He had gotten his master's degree, and he came back and ran the business until 1960 when he passed away. And during the 40s and 50s, One of the things I was able to do is I was able to take money from the business, and I became an evangelist. And I would go around to various small towns in the in Iowa and Missouri and Illinois, and I'd put up a big tent, and I would invite everybody in the community to come out and hear me preach. And we'd have people come and sing, and it was a really good time, and I was able to spread the word of the Lord to all these people who maybe didn't have access otherwise. I did that in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. In the 1950s, well, actually during the war, we made some product for the U.S. government and the military. And finally, after the war, we got our first piece of automated equipment, and instead of having to do the hand type process of making a brush, we have machines that drill holes in the wood and then stuff a staple with the tuft of fiber in it, and we can make brushes very fast. This particular brush down here, we have a machine currently that can make about 200 of these an hour, so there's been quite a change in technology. Our company sells over 1,000 different products, and we sell products all around the United States. We have about 160 sales distributors like this out on the road. In the 1950s, my son-in-law, Shorty Long, came into the business, and he ran the factory part while my son Paul was the general manager. In 1960, Paul passed away, and Shorty took over as the president of the company. Then in 1972, we went to outside management. We didn't have anybody from the family working in the business, and for the next 20 years we used outside managers. In 1991, my grandson Barry came back to run the business, and we now have about 250 employees. We have factories in Texas and California, as well as here in Fairfield. I have a sample brush here if you'd like to take one and pass them around. Also, we in year 2000 we celebrated our 100th anniversary, and we've had a newspaper printed up, and this is a picture of myself and my wife back in the 1920s. So if you'd like to have a newspaper, it tells a little bit more about the company history and some of the things that we do. We currently have 33 family members that are owners of the business, and they are of ages 28 to 88, so we have a very wide ownership base. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask me about how life was? One of the things I did in the 40s and 50s, I guess, that I forgot to tell you is I bought a bunch of farms. I owned between 8 and 10 farms at any one time. But a farm back in the 50s was anywhere from 60 acres to 150 acres. They were pretty small farms. And I hired a manager who would run those farms, and we would share the revenue off of that with the person that was the farmer. Warren, you got a question?
I do. Was the business is 102 years old now, and for all but 20 of those years, it's been run by family members. During that 20 years when it wasn't, was there a change in philosophy? Was it not as good a place to work when there wasn't a Harper or a relative of Harper running it? Or was it good?
I think we had really good managers, and they were very quality oriented, so they continued to produce a product that was of high quality. I don't think they quite had the same enthusiasm for selling the product as the family members did. Again, myself as an evangelist, I was very dynamic in personality, and I was not afraid to get up and speak, and I loved going out and selling and getting up on my soapbox. So you have to have sales in order to have a company, and without sales, nothing happens. So, any other questions? I thank you for stopping by.
Well, good morning. It's almost getting almost afternoon, isn't it? Lunch is on the way. But I am William Louden, and I'm the founder of the Louden Machinery Company, which we began in 1868 and has been in continuous existence right down to the present day. It is now known as the Louden Division of ACCO Incorporated over there on 6th Street. You've probably all been by it at one time or another. I was born in October 1841 of Irish immigrant parents who were then living in Pennsylvania. But Pennsylvania was just a brief stop, really, because in the spring we moved on out here to Jefferson County. In those days, in the spring of 1842, this was really wild and woolly frontier country. It had just recently been opened for settlement, and there wasn't a very large population in the area. My father took up farming. He'd been a farmer in Ireland before coming to America, and he continued right on in that occupation after he got out here. I was the eldest of 6 boys and 3 girls, and I was the only one that was in really poor health. I was a very sickly child. In fact, the folks didn't think I would live to make it to 20. Actually, I lived to be 90. A more famous contemporary of mine, Theodore Roosevelt, also had a very sickly childhood and outgrew the limitations that imposed on him, and I did also, but it took quite a number of years to do so. One of the problems with being a sickly child was that I really couldn't keep up with my younger brothers and sisters, and particularly one of the things that was really humiliating to me as I got into my teens was that I couldn't pitch hay. And what good were you on a farm if you couldn't pitch hay up onto the wagon and up into the hayloft and then to the animals and so forth? And so that set me to thinking, what could I do to simplify farming, make it easier, more efficient? And that led me to invent in 1867 what I called a universal hay thrower. A lot of people just preferred to call it a mechanical pitchfork, but it was a device sort of like big super tongs that you could plunge into a load of hay on a wagon, and then the horse, tied to a line fastened to the fork, then pulled it up with a pulley, pulled it up into the hayloft, and there it could be dumped wherever an individual up in the hayloft wanted to put it. This was my first patent. It was my first big invention. It's what started the Louden Machinery Company, which I organized the following year in 1868 to manufacture this hay thrower. Farmers liked it. For one thing, it cut down a lot on labor, but also they could build barns taller on the same foundation, because in the old days the height of a barn was limited to how far up a man could throw hay himself. And now with a mechanical hay fork, almost the sky was the limit, really. Also in 1868, I married a neighbor girl, Mary Jane Pattison, and we had a very long life together. And we have some of our daughters are buried there, and other members of the family are buried on the other side as well. Another one of my inventions, and incidentally I had 300 patents from the United States Patent Office by the time my career came to an end. But another very important patent that I'll mention to you, because it was one that sold widely. You could see them all over the country at one time. Now most of the barns are gone. but this was my ventilating system, and the thing that identified it was a small sheet metal cupola that put on the ridge pole of the barn. And depending on the size barn, there might be 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. And this helped to draw fresh air into the barn and to expel it out to the roof, and thus kept changing the air. And farmers found that their livestock were much healthier being in a barn where the air was constantly changing than otherwise would be the case. And one of the things that involves that ventilating system that I always like to tell about is that you can see one of them right here in town. It's on the roof of the Methodist Church at the corner of Briggs and Court Street. I doubt with their air conditioning system that they use it any longer, but it is there. And the reason it's there is an outgrowth of one of the activities of my machinery company. We employed as many as 6 architects at a time for years to design barns. And we sold the plans for barns to farmers. And we would even custom design a barn for a farmer. And where we made our money was selling the equipment that went into the barn. Well, one of those architects that worked for the company in the early 1920s now, belonged to the congregation of the Methodists. They wanted a new church. He offered his services as an architect to design it. And what would be more natural for an architect who is accustomed to my ventilating system than to put it in? And so it was put in and used by the church for a great many years. If you get up to the 3rd floor of the courthouse, across the street, you can go into the conference room. You get a good look at what this ventilator looked like. Incidentally, with the interest in good ventilation and all, also came an interest I had in conservation. Nowadays you call it ecology, but it was conservation back in the early 20th century. And one of the highlights of my life was to be invited by then President Theodore Roosevelt in 1908 to the first Governor's Conference, White House Governor's Conference on conservation. It really was the beginning of the conservation movement. And I was invited to deliver a paper on the need for conserving farmland and ways that could be done. And of course, this has been an ongoing affair ever since. People are still very concerned about this. But I was very proud of being invited to participate in this conference at the White House. And incidentally, President Theodore Roosevelt opened, it lasted for 3 days, and he always opened each session, a daily session, and would stay for at least the first paper before he had to go on about his other activities and work. Another one of my inventions that plays a very important role in the company today, as well as from years gone by, and this is what is called the monorail overhead handling system. It really started out to be simply a barn cleaner. It's a rail mounted on the rafters overhead, and suspended from it is a carrier on rollers. And the farmer could shovel the filth from the floor into the carrier, and then when it was full, just push it outside the barn rather than loading a wheelbarrow and having to trundle it out of the building. And I was demonstrating this equipment at a state fair in the East shortly before the outbreak of the First World War. And an industrialist happened to see it and saw what I was doing and thought it would be perfect for his factory, and asked me to design one for him, and which I did, and that opened up a whole new market for our company, because factories all over the country became interested in having this overhead system, and we custom designed a great many of them. Then in World War II, now that's long after I was out of the picture, but the company got an order from the federal government for a monorail system. And it was all very hush-hush. Nobody knew really what it was for, where it was going, or anything like that. It wasn't until August of 1945 that they found out what they'd been building. It was for what they'd been building it. And that was for the Oak Ridge, Tennessee atomic energy plant, where the atomic bombs were built that were dropped on Japan. And so the company played quite a part in that whole, what was then known as the Manhattan Project. So that was, again, another one of those important things. And that system remains at the heart of the Louden division at the present day here in Fairfield. Another activity that I enjoyed very much, I was very interested in community projects and activities and so forth. And so I was one of the organizers of the Elks Lodge, and I was elected the first exalted ruler of the Elks. And it was there at the Elks that we celebrated my 90th birthday. Pretty good for a kid who wasn't supposed to last till his 20. And who was turned down by the Union Army when he tried to enlist for the Civil War. But we had a 3-day celebration at the Elks. And about 3 weeks later, early November, I took up residence out here. I don't know whether there's a connection between the party or not, but at any rate, I made it to 90. I had a wonderful party celebrating it, and then I've been out here ever since. Well, it's been good talking with you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day very much.
I'm Julie Murphy, and I'm the art teacher at the middle school. We're out here at the cemetery today, and we're doing the rubbings. We start out by talking about the different symbols. The students have already had a presentation by Kent Whitney, and so they're very familiar with a lot of the different symbols and the symbolism that goes along with some of the different artwork on the stones. Then we talked about the different ways of the rules of the cemetery and what's appropriate behavior. And we start out with some of the blue paper that they actually use at Whitney Monuments, and they just find their initials to kind of get used to doing the rubbings. Then we get the larger paper, and they're planning out an entire stone, whether they have words or names, and they're looking around for different kinds of symbolism along with that. We're in kind of the older section right now, so there's a lot of interesting history along with that right here. And right now the students are out finding their examples and doing their rubbings. We're using regular crayons for that.
We're taping something here and we wanted to see your rubbing. Tell me your name.
Sarah Graber.
And
Alicia Cook.
What are you rubbing?
It's
you don't have to move it. Some sort of like a leaf.
It's like a leaf.
Are you enjoying this day?
Yeah. It's fun.
Great.
Very nice. I like the colors you used too.
How about we both do it at the same time and I'll hold since I did the most rubbing. Alright. Careful your like this?
There.
Purple or pink? Pink. Okay. Okay, I can see it now.
B-A-L-L is over here. That's Sarah. Hi.
What's your name?
Brandon. Dimmitt. Brandon Dimmitt.
And your name?
Gene Pilcher.
Okay. Are you having a good day today?
Yeah.
Out of school?
Yep. Yeah. Fall.
Have you learned a lot at the cemetery?
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of. Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
I'm James Frederick Clark, a local doctor who was born 130 years ago here in Fairfield. My parents moved from Ohio. My father was also a doctor, and he opened a drugstore down on the square. So all the while I was growing up and your age, I worked in the drugstore as a clerk, and occasionally I would help dispense medicine. You have to realize that the medical practice in those days was a lot different than it is today. Those people, those doctors at that time, didn't even know why you got sick. They didn't know what caused measles or chicken pox or mumps. They just knew you got sick. And they couldn't do anything for you if something happened inside of you. So they would have to just let you try to get well, and if you didn't, you died. But they set a lot of broken arms and legs. I graduated from the medical college at the University of Pennsylvania. I wanted to go into medicine, having been around it all my life, and so I was sent to be educated. Now, there were 4 or 5 doctors in Fairfield at that time, but most of them had very, very little education. They read a book, or they worked for a few months for another person called doctor, and put their doctor in front of their name. So these people were not very well educated. Fortunately, I was. I set up practice at age 25 in Fairfield. A couple of years later, I went into Chicago to a meeting, and as I was walking downtown in Chicago, looked in a store window, and here were golf clubs and golf balls. And I had just recently been reading about the new game of golf that was being played on the East Coast. Came over from Scotland. And I thought, I'm going to take a golf club home and introduce everybody to the golf situation. So he bought a wooden driver and 3 golf balls, came back to Fairfield, got some of his boyhood friends together, and they went out to Lamson's Pasture, which is the present Fairfield Golf and Country Club. It was just an old pasture with cows and sheep in it. They put in a couple of holes, and they had a golf course. And when they were playing, they would throw the club back and forth across to one another because they only had the one club to play with all together. They bought a lawnmower in 1901 to mow the greens, but the sheep and cows continued to take care of the other areas. Of course, now that's the beautiful Fairfield Golf and Country Club. I served as a doctor in the Spanish-American War. In that war, I discovered that we did not have enough help. There were no nurses. In fact, the armed services did not have any women in them. So I contacted people in Washington, D.C., and convinced them that we needed nurses. And they started recruiting them, and pretty soon we had help. Those were the first women in the armed forces in the United States. I got back in 1899 at the age of 35, and at that time everybody was being very patriotic, and there were a number of bands. Different organizations had bands. The city had a band. In fact, the city band became the 34th Army Band eventually, years later. But the Fairfield City always had a band. They needed a bandstand in the Central Park. So I worked at raising money, and we put a bandstand up. That bandstand lasted into the 60s. It was starting to fall apart, and the present one was built. I bought a horseless carriage, the second one in Jefferson County. What's a horseless carriage? Okay. The first one was steam powered. You had to fire it up for half an hour before you could go anywhere, and that didn't work well. So I bought an Oldsmobile. It had a gasoline engine, and it worked very well if it didn't rain or didn't snow. The roads were the size of that road right there, one lane. There was no paving. If it rained, it was mud, and if it snowed, the car wasn't going to get through it. I had to hold the horses of the carriages coming by the car. I'd have to shut the car down, go out and lead the horses around the car because they were scared to death of this thing. And that was back in the good old days. I served as mayor for 1 year in 1905. The next year I represented Jefferson County in the General Assembly in Des Moines, and it did not meet as often as it does today. In 1911, at age 46, I was appointed by the Jefferson County Medical Society to be in charge of a hospital campaign in Fairfield to build a new hospital, to build a hospital, period. There wasn't one. Operations of any kind were done on the kitchen table at home. So we raised $25,000 in donations. We had the first bond issue for a hospital in the world in Jefferson County for $25,000 to build the hospital. And so with the $50,000, the hospital was built. In 1913, I had a little disaster. My house burned down, and so it was necessary to build a new one. I went to Chicago and hired an architect who was very well known at that time. His name was Barry Bryn, not very well known today, but his teacher is. He got his instruction from Frank Lloyd Wright. The house is standing down on the corner of Madison and South Main. It's a red brick house, and it was built 85 years ago, and it still looks like it's very, very modern. So when you're down there on South Main, take a look at that. It has windows that are kind of half circle shaped. They are polished, beveled glass, and they sparkle in the light. It's a beautiful place. I lived for a number of years after this and died in 1942. I was well known all over the area. I was a very prominent person in Fairfield and very well liked. Any questions?
Is that true about the whole Jefferson being the first hospital in the world?
No, it wasn't the first hospital. It was the first one that was purchased using a bond issue.
Oh, okay.
In the world?
In the world. Mm-hmm.
Are some of the buildings around town with the Clark name, this Clark?
I don't know.
Probably related.
Yeah, very, very likely. He had no children, so I don't know what the connection is. I noticed that there are several Clarks here, but I don't know what the connection is. His sister is buried here, and she never married, so it's kind of a combination.
Was he married?
What?
Was he married?
Oh yeah, he was married to Melinda.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yes. But they lived, well, how old was he when he died?
He was 82.
Nope. 1864 to 1942.
He was an old dude.
How old was he?
Old.
What? 78, you're right. You're right, 78.
That's old. Do you guys know what was going on then in 1942?
War was going on. Okay.
Welcome. Welcome to our shop. I'm Kent Whitney, and we appreciate you being here. Are you enjoying the cemetery day?
Yeah. It's fun.
Okay, good. Good. So you've been to the cemetery and the funeral home, and what else have you done?
We haven't been to the funeral home yet.
Oh, you haven't been to the funeral home?
To the cemetery and to the library.
Okay, great. Well, this is an old family business. I'm the 5th generation to run the monument company, and up here on the wall is some of the previous owners. It's all father to son. Our company started in the 1800s, and we've been in this business for over 130 years now. So what we're going to do here is split you into 2 groups, and so that way you can all see a little better and ask any questions that you want. So why don't I take this first half here, just right here, and you come on with me. And Rhonda, you take the other half. We'll start over here. Oh, it's great. It's great. If I had more hair, I'd let you do it to me too. But
I have a clip.
Oh, no, that's all right. That's all right. So when a family comes in, you can see all the wide variety of styles and colors and shapes and finishes. What we like to do is show a nice variety, so depending on what their need is, whether it's a couple that come in together buying their monument ahead of time, or it's a family who may have lost a child or a parent, then we determine what their needs are. We try to get to know them as well as we can, and so that we can design something that's real appropriate for them. As you can see, all the colors, these granites come from all over the world. They're quarried in some of the domestic granites in South Dakota, Vermont, Georgia, Wisconsin, and then there's a lot of imported granites. We have a lot of granite that we use from Canada, India, Africa. So there's more of those types of granites on the market now today that we use. Like this black granite here, this is quarried out of India. And you'll notice the etchings, and you've probably seen some of those at the cemetery where we do the real detailed sketches on the black granites, and that's called diamond etching, and we'll have you try some of that here in a little bit back in the shop. And so anyway, you're welcome to walk around a little bit. You can touch and feel the stone. Do we have any questions? Do you have a question? Okay. But again, you just notice all the different textures, and so, yes.
How long does it take to make a tombstone?
Well, it depends on how detailed some of the design work is or how large, but on the average, we'll spend probably a day anyway on a monument. Yes.
How much would like one cost with just like maybe the name and like maybe the one from India?
Okay. Again, it depends on size and color of granite, but a double monument for 2 people, you usually figure they'll start at around $1,500 and go on up. The average range is like $2,000 to $4,000, but again, they can get a lot more than that if they're like your black granites. Your red granites tend to be on the higher end, and if we do a lot more design work on them, that'll add to the cost. So there was one question? Yeah.
What are these things for?
These are vases, and if people want to put flowers out to decorate and get them off the ground, it makes it easier for the cemetery to mow and trim, and just a way to display some flowers on the monument. And we attach these to down to the base. Yeah.
How big can a monument be?
Well, have you seen the Washington Monument? In Washington, D.C., the large obelisk, I mean, it's really unlimited. Or even some of the old Egyptian pyramids, those are monuments. So really, it can be as large as what a person could build, but generally what we use today is what you see here. This is more the size for today. Yes?
At the yard.
Cemetery?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them I saw were like falling over.
Mm-hmm.
How do you prevent that?
Okay, that's a good question. Today what we do is put a concrete foundation That's you want to dig it to be real square, maybe flare out at the bottom, wider at the bottom, minimum 3 foot deep. Generally under these two-piece monuments we'll go 4 foot deep with ready-mix concrete. So it's a large foundation, and if that's done properly they will stay straight and level. In the older parts you'll see where they're leaning towards, and 9 times out of 10 they're leaning towards the grave, and that was because in the older days they would just bury in a wood box. Well, in time that of course decays and erodes, and all the ground tends to kind of draw that way, which then forces the monuments to lean that way. So today they use concrete vaults, which helps prevent that, and the lots, the cemetery lots, are longer so that there's solid ground between the monument's foundation and where the grave will be. So that helps prevent that from happening. Yes?
Can you get them attached to the concrete?
Yeah, we put a sealer between the granite and the foundation, which is a bond, and then it also is a moisture seal to prevent freezing and thawing. But primarily it's the weight that holds them in place. So, yeah.
How much does one weigh?
Well, something like this top piece here would weigh about 500 to 600 pounds. So granites, again, it depends on the color, the grain structure, as far as how dense they are. But granite generally weighs in the ballpark 180 pounds per cubic foot. So in your math class, maybe you can figure out what they weigh. So, are there any other questions? One of the other things that we do after families have selected a monument, then we do a layout on our computer. We have a CAD system, and we will design it or lay it out on the CAD. We've got literally hundreds and hundreds of designs that we've acquired or drawn up and scanned into our computer, so we can put anything from a dog to a fish to a cross or whatever. We do a lot of personalization now. You may have noticed out at the cemetery on some of the older ones, or on the slides that I showed you last week, the old epitaphs, where today we tend to do more pictorial designs where we show people's lives with the designs. And that's a theme that has been coming up a lot today. When you're out in the cemetery, oftentimes with all of this, we associate a cemetery with death, that somebody has died. But really, if you think about it, it's more a place to recognize people's lives. These monuments that we do, what we try to do is capture everybody's individuality, that they have. Everybody's different. And so when we meet with a family, we try to find those things that make them unique, and then somehow get that engraved on the monument. So we're really memorializing that somebody lived, not that they died. So the cemetery can be a really beautiful place to go. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of art. So it's great that you're doing this. Here in a minute now, we'll go into the shop and we'll show you how we actually do some of the engraving and etching in the shop.
Do you guys make the Fairfield?
And I'll tell you a little bit about that. Okay. Now back in the shop, after we've done the layout on our computer, we will cut out a stencil. The computer operates what's called a plotter, and it has a knife in it, and it actually cuts out a rubber stencil that we apply right to the granite. And that's what this sheet of rubber is, and you can see there's some lettering that's been cut out on it. Okay? So this has an adhesive back, and so we'll stick it, we'll line it up and position it where we want, and we stick that to the granite. Then what we'll need to do is wherever we want to take the polish off, we'll cut this rubber stencil out and remove it, leaving like a border where we want to leave the polish. From there, what we'll do is take the piece over into one of these rooms over here, which is a sandblast room, and we'll frost that polish off. One thing I want to share with you before we go over there, this is a cake of rubber, and back like in the early 1900s, of course they didn't have this sophisticated of a material, but what they would do is melt this rubber in a big vat and get it to a liquid form, and then literally pour it or brush it onto the granite surface. And then from there they would, by hand, draw or do their layout and all the lettering and all that information, and then cut that out with a knife. So, you know, it's things have changed quite a bit. Our industry, just like a lot of industries with the technology, the use of computers and lasers and to engrave stone. But the one key, though, is to use that technology, but don't let it take over to the point where we lose the art or the trade, because it is a craft, and that's something we always want to maintain. You'll notice the hoist and the slings. Obviously, there was a question earlier of the weight of these. The piece like this, probably 450, 500 pounds. So we can't move them around real easy. So we have the hoists to lift them. We have the carts with wheels. We have wagons that we roll them around on from room to room or from station to station so that we can work on them. And of course, again, outside we have a hoist on our truck, and then a crane outside where we unload semis when granite arrives here. After we've done the stenciling, I'll take you over here to where we do to our sandblast rooms. In this smaller room, this is where we'll take like the polish off. You'll notice on some of them where there's a square panel or some of the lettering is lighter in color. Well, we've sandblasted that off, or what we call frosting. We'll do that in this room. We actually come into the room and wear an air supplied hood and use a smaller little sandblasting generator. And then we'll also do the carvings like this. You know, you'll notice on some of them they have where we shape the leaves or the petals of flowers, and that's called shape carving. And it's a relief carving where we use compressed air and an abrasive and a smaller nozzle, and we'll actually just carve that granite. So it's just a process of steps. We'll peel away the stencil that we use, and we'll carve the first couple of petals, and then we'll peel the next one, and so you layer it. So it's just a series of steps, and you try to create a carving of a flower. So we do that in this room, and then in this other sandblast room over here, this is where we'll cut all the deep sinkages like the letters or the lines around the panels, the details on the flowers, and you can see we've got one set up in here that is partially blasted. We did the family name up above, and you can see how the abrasive that we use kind of roughs up that stencil. So we go as deep as what the rubber stencil will allow us to do. After a while it starts getting very rough and frayed, and then we lose the nice sharp edges that we want to have on the granite. So then down below you can see we haven't sandblasted that yet where the smaller lettering is. And so this nozzle travels back and forth. It's just a larger version of what we were talking about in the other room. It's blasting air at 100 pounds per square inch. We use aluminum oxide, and again the abrasive is bouncing off that rubber stencil, and then wherever we've peeled out for letters or lines or designs, the detail, and the granite is exposed, it cuts into the stone. So it's just after that step is completed, then we'll peel off the stencil that we use, and then you'll notice like on the floor is one that's ready to wash. We haven't finished it yet. Over here are some examples of some of the different ones that we've got that are ready to take to the cemetery. You'll notice the different carvings of roses. We've got etched angels. We've got cardinals. Here's a scene with a boat on a mountain lake. So again, showing the example of the personalization and how the detail. And then finally, you'll notice we have, here's a tile, and what we're having you do is we'd like for you to try your hand at some etching, some of the diamond etching. You've seen the angels and the portraits and all that, so we'd like to see if we have any artists in the group. So why don't you go ahead and start us out. You just turn it on right there, and go ahead and just sign your name for us as a souvenir. Well, you'll find a spot. Actually, I meant to have that tile of Jordan's to show.
Oh, look at this one. Hey, Kent, did you say you had a list of
Good afternoon. My name's Steve Triplett. I'm principal of Fairfield Middle School. Just to kind of give you a summary of our cemetery day that we're just completing. I'm here at Whitney Monuments, and our kids are enjoying themselves and learning about the building of monuments and the etching. This is just one of the many projects of our 7th grade cemetery day. We've had a beautiful day. What makes this work is our students get to learn about the history of Fairfield and the history of some of our citizens that have made this town special. The 7th grade team has done a lot of planning for about a year and a half to put this project together, and together with tremendous community help, we have put together a program for kids which we think they'll benefit for years to come. So I would just like to express my thanks to our 7th grade team and the students for doing such a great job, and also the great community members for their support. Thank you.